We're continuing our discussion on tone, lights and darks, and color, warm colors, cool colors. We talked about creating different tone by coverage and by pressure. For instance, from light to darker, and then if we wanted to go darker in the next panel, we would color in, pressing a little bit harder, doing cross hatching, which is going a different direction. Same with color. We experimented with what happens when you layer on top of a color, a yellow, layer it with orange and yellow, and then red and orange, and with the blue, adding blue, green on top of blue. But with these, we have a clear distinction between these different panels. We have a line around the different colors. And that's an important thing to learn, because sometimes you want a very sharp edge. Sharp edges and dark contrast are what bring things forward. It's what tells us that this tree is in front of these mountains and those trees in the background. But if you want to indicate that there is something far away in the background, then the tone needs to be usually cooler, not always, but usually in the blue range. Even though we know trees back there are green, the atmosphere mixes with that image and makes it look bluish or purplish. And you notice, get this up closer, that the edges are very soft, as opposed to this tree trunk, which is very dark and very sharply edged against that light tree. You also notice that there's more definition in these branches and these leaves than in these, which just look like a bunch of blobs. And of course this trunk is smaller, so that tells us that that tree is in the background. So how does one, with colored pencil, every medium of course is different, but with colored pencil, how do you get this soft edge so that you don't have an outline look to the mountains, which looks like the way we all did it in second or third grade, which is fine, but maybe we don't want to do that now. So one way to do that is to work into the color. For instance, I'm going to put some yellow down here. I'm just going to do a blob. I'm not going to draw. If I were to draw a line, let's do it that way first. If I were to draw a line, I'm going to put my pencils in my hand here so I can grab them. If I were to make a shape and then color that in, it's a lovely shape, I have to admit, but it's very defined. And maybe I don't want to see that edge. Excuse me. Maybe I want the edges to be very indistinct, is another word for soft. In the art world, we use the word soft, but probably more accurately would be to say that it's indistinct. So if I just do a sort of irregular blob here, and then I'm going to do another sort of irregular blob next to it, but I'm going to work into, and I'm working very lightly now, I'm going to work into this yellow so that I can blend the two. And it's really with colored pencil, because colored pencil isn't wet like oil paint or watercolor or dusty like pastels. You can't really do this. I mean, you can blend a little bit that way, but to really get a soft edge or an indistinct edge, you have to do what almost feels like a weaving. You put down a little bit of the first tone and then a little bit of the second tone right over top of it, and then work beyond it. And right where the two meet is a slightly different color, but it creates a blurred edge. And when I go on, I might want to make this blob very dark Might want to add some red to get it a little bit darker. And again, I want it to blend in with the orange. So I'm going lightly when I go over the orange. And then where I want it to be very dark, I'm pressing and going over that shape much more heavily, and going over it repeatedly. And then let's just say I have a green tree in the back of this red blob, or a green shape. I don't want to get into naming things, so I'll just say I have a green blob I want next to this red blob, but I want it to, again, have an indistinct edge, very soft edge. So I'm going to work right over the red so that there's no sharp edge. And the darker the color and the more opposite they are on the color wheel, red and green being opposites, think Christmas. So I need to weave it a little more carefully by taking the red now into the green. And I'm going very lightly, just creating layer upon layer upon layer. And then as I get away from that blended area, that indistinct edge there, I can get darker with my green if I want a pure green. If I want this blob to be pure green. And if I want to darken it or come up with a even darker color at this intersection here, this combination of red and green, I can go in with a little bit of purple, and I'm going to get an even darker area. But again, I'm overlapping, working over each color before I go into its own color. If I wanted to then have some purple down here, I could do that. This is really a blue, I should say. It's a reddish blue. But again, I'm going over those areas of color. So this is a technique that not only is useful when doing a traditional landscape like this, but it can also, it's fun even in a non-representative or an abstract image. It's fun to see what kinds of colors and what kind of shapes can evolve when they are woven together like this.